Today, we will talk about XLM and its connections and experience in CBDC pilots that has some ties into XRP and Velo because of Project mBridge, which I have talked about a lot in regards to XRP and Velo, but I have recently been made aware of a lot of extremely deep ties into Stellar and XLM. It appears as if Project mBridge is involved with the tokenization of marine bonds via Project Genesis, which is utilized by Stellar as the main source of trust in facilitating transactions. And it just so happens Stellar is directly called out in that BIS documentation, which is all tying into a lot of extremely important information on how Ukraine's CBDC and DLT infrastructure appears to be live on Stellar, which I will cover at a different time because it's a huge topic on its own. And here, in my own humble opinion, is where we are actually headed with all of this, and DHN crypto highlights it well.
The central bank working with the private, no questions asked. That would be very hard to do in the case of a direct issue. Keep in mind that this is a public-private partnership. That's the prevailing model in the United States. The digital dollar in the United States is also going to be a public-private model. You'll have the Fed, the central bank, working with the private banks that own the Fed in the United States. And that will be the partnership between them will be the system. It's not going to be all public. It's not going to be all private. It is a partnership. If the Fed were to do a direct issued CBDC, it would take them a few years to design.
And I strongly agree with that kind of an opinion. I don't really think it's an opinion anymore. I think that the companies that I talk about a lot, they are extremely interconnected, not only into each other, but into financial institutions of all types, from central banks to quote unquote private banks. And it appears as if Ripple is positioned to concentrate on the institution to institution end of things, and Stellar is more positioned to interact with the person to institution end of things. And it's not P2P against B2B. It is Stellar is concentrating on the value in between you and an institution, while Ripple appears to be concentrating in between the value chain in between your institution and a central bank. It does have a lot of interconnections, and at times it is even overlapping in some areas because of how the infrastructure has to interconnect in order to enable these quote unquote centralized technologies and networks and combine them into a quote unquote decentralized financial infrastructure. And here is the extremely important part of all of this. Project Genesis itself, which is revolving around the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, or HKMA, directly calls out Stellar itself in the information on its technical architecture. And it calls out Stellar assets and anchors. And it explains how the APIs and interoperability, as well as Stellar consensus protocol features such as clawback, are instrumental in its institutional applications. And as far as Project mBridge goes, the HKMA, as well as the Bank of Thailand, which is connected to Velo, are pivotal players in this. Now, what exactly is Project mBridge?
The Bank for International Settlements Innovation Hub is exploring solutions for overcoming these limitations. The aim is to allow cross-border payments to be immediate, cheap, widely accessible, and settled in a secure medium. A possible solution would be a multiple central bank digital currency platform, or mCBDC. That is, a technical platform that directly connects digital central bank money. Building on earlier CBDC prototypes, the BIS Innovation Hub and the 4 participating central banks joined forces to bring to life such a multi-CBDC platform named mBridge, which stands for Multiple CBDC Bridge. By providing a shared platform on which participants can conduct peer-to-peer payments directly across jurisdictions using safe local central bank money, mBridge can tackle the pain points of international payments, advance cross-border settlement in digital central bank money, and support diversification of currencies in cross-border transactions.
Stellar actually has a CBDC white paper, and I believe it was published in 2021, which interestingly enough was right before they officially got involved with the quote-unquote humanitarian aid for Ukraine. And it's interesting because the architecture and the implementation of that can be easily expanded to look like a trial for how a CBDC can be distributed. Here we begin to get into the core content of this specific video, which explains the long-standing connections that Stellar has into the institutions that are connected into the HKMA and Project mBridge. There are also ties into the same institution with the Bank of Thailand and Velo, specifically MasterCard and Deutsche Bank. I have talked about Zodia custody in the past and how it has connections into Ripple and XRP. However, it has been called out as the first technical host of the Stellar disbursement platform, which once again ties right back into the Ukrainian CBDC test run, and how I have found a lot of evidence that points to how Ukraine's DLT infrastructure that is created on Stellar is actually in operation. And if you look at who got into Zodia custody, it was founded in part by Standard Chartered. And it is also interesting because SBI Holdings, which ties heavily into XRP, except it also ties into Stellar and XLM because of the partnership with Elliptic, who performs on-chain analytics. MasterCard has executed the first tokenized deposit with Standard Chartered. Tokenization of real-world assets and the potential use of different forms of tokenized currency is integral to the future of the financial industry, who is the CEO of Standard Chartered Hong Kong. MasterCard has just launched a crypto credential, which allows people to send crypto to any customer at an exchange with a simple username instead of a wallet address. That is a topic that Jed McCaleb of Stellar has talked about a lot. And in my opinion, it's extremely important because when we are talking about the adoption of a DLT infrastructure, you can't have grandma who can't even text try to conduct a transaction how we have to now. It has to be extremely simple. And here is more on HKMA's project EHKD, which we were talking about in the project Genesis documentation, where it is talking about CBDCs, tokenized deposits, and instant settlement between tokenized assets, with programmable prepayments with smart contracts, which exist on Stellar because of Soroban, and how it ultimately creates an easier path for payments, including offline payments, which Stellar L2s, such as Velo and SHX, have been concentrating on. The EHKD is connected to the USD.
EHKD. So for the time being, at least, the Hong Kong dollar is intended to be preserved. And as many of you would know, the Hong Kong dollar is pegged to the US dollar. So that's relevant.
And I am beginning to be of the opinion that the more USD stablecoins and collateralized tokenized assets there are, it can help the preservation of the USD in the age of BRICS. On the HKMA's site, it specifically calls out Project mBridge, and we have pointed out how there are ties into Project mBridge as well as the EHKD because of Stellar's ties into Standard Chartered. But why are Standard Chartered so important here? They have formed a consortium with their ventures and tokenization platform called Terrible Assets to submit a solution to issue CBDC denominated bonds to retail investors in small amounts. And that ties into Libera, which is a tokenization platform of theirs, which was created out of Standard Charter's participation in the Monetary Authority of Singapore's CBDC challenge that was concentrating on the potential of a retail CBDC, which also ties into my speculation on how Stellar is much more positioned for a retail CBDC compared to Ripple, even though they would each have a critical role in reflecting the value within the institutional infrastructure overall. And MasterCard is important because along with Standard Chartered and Libera, they were all involved in that tokenized deposits pilot involving tokenized carbon credits, which then connects into Project Genesis, which is specifically calling out Stellar. Here is a November 2023 article on how Standard Charter launched Libera, which will aid creation of the first tokenized Singapore dollar government bond fund, which we heard is connected to the USD. In an October 2024 article, it is explaining how a wholesale CBDC is used to settle ABN AMRO digital commercial paper on DLT, which is essentially a bond, which also has ties into Deutsche Börse, which I have talked about having connections into Stellar and the tokenization of Russian gold, which I will be expanding on soon. And here it specifically calls out Stellar. In an older article on the topic, it is explaining how they have been working on it for about a year and a half at least at this point. In my upcoming video after this one, all of the Stellar ties into Ukraine will be a lot more obvious.